My name is Asaf Katzir. I'm a junior in the Randall Research Scholars Program majoring in finance, economics, and psychology. And under the instruction of Dr. Christopher Whaley in the Department of Economics, Finance, and Legal Studies, I did a dynamic analysis of mutual fund risk profiles. Now, starting off with some background and scope of this project, I'd first like to explain what mutual funds are. So mutual funds are an investment vehicle that any individual or institution can invest in. And what it is you have a fund manager or group of fund managers that decide on multiple investments that they want to invest in, and from that create a mutual fund. That could be stocks, bonds, or any other financial vehicle. And then what individual investors can do, they can invest in this mutual fund. And the benefit of mutual funds is that you have an active manager who is making investment decisions for you, and you should have less risk because there are multiple securities, so you are more diversified and less exposed to any one security. Now, how we are measuring our data and specifically the risk profiles of these mutual funds is using something called beta. And beta is an indexed measure of risk. So normally you'll index it against some sort of market indicator. A common one would be the S&P 500 index. And what this does is you are tracking your specific investment or whatever you are tracking. You are indexing it towards that market indicator's performance and its risk profile. So for example, if you have a beta of 1 compared to the S&P, that means your investment is as risky as the S&P 500. Anything above that is riskier. Anything less than 1 is less risky than that indicator that you're tracking. And then finally, the place that we collected most of our data from is the Morningstar Direct database. So Morningstar is a well-renowned international investment research company, and they collect a lot of data on different securities and the market as a whole. And we specifically looked at mutual funds, and we wanted to look how the star ratings that Morningstar assigns affects the risk profiles and the risk behavior of these fund managers. So looking at the picture on the right, you can see the distribution of how Morningstar assigns the star rating. So for example, 5 stars, which is the top performing funds, only goes to the top 10% of funds. So there's competition in order for fund managers to reach this 5-star threshold, because the higher your ranking, the more cash flows you can expect to receive from investors. So understanding the specific models we use to analyze all this data from Morningstar Direct, we used 2 models. The first one was the difference in difference regression model. And basically what this does is it takes a lot of variables and tries to determine the difference between a control and a treatment group. So for example, if we're looking at the changes between a 4-star fund and what happens when it shifts up to 5 stars, we will have a control group that over a certain period of time maintains a 4-star rating. Then we have a treatment group, which in the first half of the timeline has a 4-star rating, but then there is an event in which those funds switch upwards to a 5-star rating, and that we can measure the difference in beta between those different types of funds. We also wanted to understand the persistence and how long any measured change in beta would affect these funds that went through a star rating shift. So through this, we had a persistence model that looked at how long after that specific event we still saw significant changes in the risk measured by beta. So looking at our results, first off, I'd like to highlight from the 4 to 5-star change, we can see that there's a 0.249 increase in beta. Now, what I want to clarify about this beta is this already controls for any additional returns. So 5-star funds tend to gain more returns than 4-star funds, and you need to adjust returns based on the risk profile. So this 0.249 or 24.9% of additional risk is after already controlling for those additional returns you would expect to see from a 5-star fund. And this is very fascinating because this is in line with previous research that showed when funds go from 4 stars to 5 stars, they also see an increase of cash flows by about 25%. So that was a very fascinating data point that we found. And then also highlighting what happens when star ratings shift downwards, meaning a fund gets downgraded in their performance. So we noticed that from 5 stars to 4 stars and 4 stars to 3 stars, there was a decrease in risk. But then what's very fascinating is from 3 stars to 2 stars, or when a fund goes from an average performing fund to a poor performing fund, there is actually an increase in the risk behavior that these fund managers take of about 28% at the time of the event. So here we have a visual representation, and again, looking at the 4 to 5 stars, you can see that dotted line in the middle, that indicates the time of the event when there was a star rating shift, and the red line highlights those funds that jumped up from 4 stars to 5 stars. And as you can see, there's a big increase in the beta that's measured of those funds compared to the control group that you can see in blue at the bottom. And then again, from 3 stars to 2 stars, you can see that there is that big difference, and you can see that gap between the red line, again, the funds that went down to 2 stars, and the blue line, the funds that stayed at 3 stars. Now, digging into the persistence model, what we found is for funds that went from 4 stars to 5 stars, the additional risk that they saw at the time of the star rating shift persisted at statistically significant level for about 5 months after that star rating shift, meaning that there is some residual risk that you see over time, but it does dissipate in the long run and no longer becomes statistically significant. However, you can see, based on the numbers, that the magnitude of that additional risk does decrease over time as well. So by month 5, you only have a 2% additional risk for your investment controlling for returns compared to that 25% we saw at the time of the change. And then for the 3 to 2 star funds, we actually saw that persistence maintain for up to 8 months, so an even longer time period with heightened risk to your investment, which we found to be very interesting. So what are some main takeaways we can learn from all this data? First off, we know that 5-star rated funds provide the best returns in the long run for investors. However, when funds undergo a star rating shift recently, they possess excess risk after already controlling for any additional returns they may gain, and investors need to be aware of that risk. And then this excess risk, it doesn't persist in the long term. Over a little bit of time, it does persist, but the magnitude decreases, and eventually it becomes negligible in a statistically significant sense. So investors can utilize this information to optimize their risk profile. So for example, if you're 60 years old and you're about to retire and you want to be very conservative with your risk profile and you're invested in mutual funds, you may want to see if they have undergone a recent change in star rating, because that means that you're exposing yourself to additional risks. So you may want to sell off your investments in those mutual funds to stay within your risk profile. So some next steps we want to take in this research is to explain the behavior of the fund managers as to why they're pursuing excess risk under these star rating shifts, specifically from 4 to 5 stars and from 3 to 2 stars. Also, we would like to conduct some robustness testing, which is pretty much where we measure different variables and tweak our regression equations to see how our results and methods stand up to different data points and whether or not it is robust enough to be peer-reviewed and last a publication cycle. So with that, I'd love to open up the floor to any questions.
Do you have any hypotheses that might explain the behavior of these investors or managers?
Yeah, so in terms of some hypotheses, looking at the 4 to 5 stars, it could be possible that when fund managers, when they see that they've been bumped up to a 5-star rating, they are now in that top 10% of mutual funds. So they may feel that they need to justify to the new investors that are coming in, that additional cash flows that they're seeing, they may have to justify their 5-star rating to them, so they will take on a more aggressive investment approach that doesn't necessarily increase their returns as much as it increases their risk, which is why we see that heightened risk level. And then possibly after you have that honeymoon period of new investors coming in, and once the fund has solidified itself as a 5-star rated fund over a couple of months, they then return back to their normal investment philosophy. Obviously, this would require some more research, but that is one initial hypothesis that we have to explain this behavior.
Asaf, on slide 9, you noted that you'd like to enhance robustness as this was future directions with that. What factors would you explore or consider to enhance
Yeah, so we can look at different variables that are available on the Morningstar Direct database. We can look at, for example, seeing if the tenure of a fund manager, if that has an impact and if that is influencing our equations in any way, because there could be that like younger fund managers or ones that are less tenured are more prone to react to changes in their rating versus more experienced investors. So that is one area we could look into.
Interesting. Very good. else?